Hey, my name is Dr. Boyce Watkins. Welcome to drboycetv.com, the home for intelligent Black people. And we want to talk about Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter is in the middle of an interesting controversy. Michael Brown Sr., the father of Michael Brown, has basically gone to Black Lives Matter and said, y'all need to pay up, cut the check. And he didn't just ask for a couple dollars. He actually said that they need to write a check for $20 million. Everybody, give me a yes or no in the chat. First of all, I want to welcome you and say hello. Welcome to drboycetv.com, the home for intelligent Black people. Put your hashtag B1 in the chat, hit the thumbs up button and all that. But I want to ask you guys a yes or no question. How many of you were aware of what happened between Michael Brown Sr. and Black Lives Matter? Or at least how many of you were aware of the financial questions people are asking about Black Lives Matter? Like they're asking, where's the money? All this money is being donated on behalf of Black people to a specific organization, not to all organizations, but to one organization that has jumped out front and said, we represent Black people. Give us the money. Give us the money. And Black Lives Matter has been that organization. So there was a recent report where Black Lives Matter released their finances, and I'm going to lay a little bit of the foundation. We'll lay out more as we get to our guests. But basically, there was a financial report released by Black Lives Matter toward the end of last year or early this year, I guess, where they actually claimed that they made $90 million. And that was a smaller number than I thought. I thought it was closer to $1 billion, to be honest with you, because all these corporations were giving money to Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter-like organizations in the summertime. And that's immediately right before Michael Brown's father stepped up and said, y'all need to write a check for $20 million to support the activism in Ferguson, particularly since you've used my son, Michael Brown. You've used that name to make money off our name. You've made money off our name, so you need to cut the check. So to speak on this issue, I got three amazing guests. Jeff Lightsey Jr. from Boss Sports, the blackbosschannel.com, Mr. Tony Lindsay. He's also on the Black Boss Channel a lot. He's a film director. How you doing today, Tony?
Hey, how you doing, brother?
Good to see you. And Miss Zakia Sankara Jabbar. And I think I said her name right this time. Did I say it right?
Yep, you got it.
All right. The host of Real Talk? Real Talk Uncensored?
Real Talk with ZSJ. Yep, that's my YouTube channel, Real Talk with ZSJ.
Real Talk with ZSJ. All right, so everybody should follow Real Talk with ZSJ because she does a lot of real talk. So let me just jump in. I don't think the brothers will mind if we do ladies first here. Hit the thumbs up button, everybody. Please do that. So Zakia, Michael Brown's father steps up and says, Black Lives Matter, you need to write this check for $20 million because you're using our name and we're not getting compensated for it. What say you, Miss Zakia?
I say good for Mike Brown Jr. He's absolutely within his right. I think that this is something that some of the other families, Samaria Rice, who is still reeling from the loss of her son, Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Ohio, and so many other families across the country. Keep in mind that Michael Brown's father, Samaria Rice, and a few other high-profile families who have been victims of police murder, state-sanctioned murder, let's be real about what this is, have not received any kind of financial support necessarily from the nonprofit industrial complex. Unfortunately, some of the founders of the Black Lives Matter organization actually have received the lion's share of the donations that's coming from the nonprofit sector or from the foundations and things like that, and from some corporations. And it was reported in the New York Times, and I'm sure we have the article, we can share it here, that $90 million is how much they raised in 2020 alone. So that doesn't even include the money that was raised before. I would be remiss if I did not shout out the Black Lives Matter DC, and also Brother Tory Russell and his organization out of Ferguson, who stood with Mike Brown's father and wrote the letter with the demand. So shout out to those two organizations. But Black Lives Matter DC was a part of the Black Lives Matter 10 group. There were 10 chapters across the country, including BLM DC. They wrote a letter back in December, and I'm not sure if we discussed it on this channel, but they wrote a letter, an open letter to Black Lives Matter to say, hey, we want full transparency. You all have not been having money come down to the chapters who are actually doing the work on the ground. And we're concerned. And we want a reporting and we want the lion's share of the money that you all are receiving because we're doing the work. we have 3 founders who are ostensibly millionaires right now off of the bodies of dead Black boys and men.
Okay, so sorry, I wasn't trying to show an advertisement for Coming to America. I was actually sharing my screen, trying to show you all that Black Lives Matter. According to CNN, it says that Black Lives Matter raised $90 million in 2020 and gave almost a quarter of it to local chapters and organizations. That's what CNN is saying. And so the interesting thing about this, Jeff, is that it seems to me that Black Lives Matter is trying to come clean when it comes to the finances, but a lot of people feel like there's still a lot of questions in terms of who's controlling the money, also where the money's coming from. They would not release the list of donors. I thought that was very interesting. When somebody won't tell you who gave the money, the bulk of the lion's share of the money, it could just mean that the donors want to be anonymous, but it could also mean that at the very least, it means that you don't understand exactly what the motivation is for giving the money. What do you think, Jeff? I mean, do you think that they have some questions they need to answer for the public?
There's a number of questions that need to be answered. So let's think about break down what Ms. Zakiya said, because we have to paint the picture. The $90 million that was donated in 1 year. Black Lives Matter, if I'm not mistaken, was created either right after the death of either Trayvon Martin, which is in 2012, or Michael Brown. I can't remember exactly when, but we're talking about it was after Trayvon. So we're talking about that was 2012. This is 21. So we're talking about a span of 8 years, at least what they released. So if it was just $90 million, which I'd imagine 90 million is just a number they're given, but who knows what you made in the previous 7 years. So that's something to take into account. Secondly, what Michael Brown Sr. said, because the organization it started out the Trayvon, but it got really big after Michael Brown's death in 2014. And so what he is saying, since his son's death in 2014, and this organization essentially blew up out of the sky after the death of his son, he has received $500. That's it. $500 is all that he and his organization down in Ferguson has received, even though this organization, Black Lives Matter, blew up after the death of his own son. So that is why he is demanding $20 million, because he's received only $500. And then furthermore, so what Boyce just said was they said they spent about a quarter of the money. And that's also what I read. So they received $90 million, but they've only spent about $30 million. Where's the other 60 going? What's up?
And what did they spend the 30 million on? Where did that 30 million go?
So there's 30 million that went somewhere, and then there's 60 million sitting in somebody's bank account. So where is the other 60 million? Like, what do you plan on doing? And so now, since the release of their $90 million, like what they received, now they're saying, oh, we're giving out these grants of $1,000 a piece, and they've had 3,000 applications, right? So if you take 3,000, you're giving out $1,000. I'm not a mathematician, but that's still only pennies on the dollar, right? Like compared to 90 million. So there is a number of questions that are still out there and are still lingering. And Michael Brown, and he deserves answers, and all of these other people that they have capitalized off their deaths, whether it's Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Tamir Rice, and we can go on and on. But this is an organization that's capitalized off the death of our people, and that is at least garnered $90 million in 1 year instead of $60 million sitting in somebody's bank account, and everybody needs answers for it.
Okay, so Tony Lindsay, I want to ask you this. Zakiya used a really great term that I think is quite operative for what we're talking about. She said the nonprofit industrial complex, and I'll let Zakiya later on refine her definition and explain exactly what she meant. But I'll tell you what my interpretation was. What I think about when I heard her say nonprofit industrial complex is I thought about the documentary I saw on YouTube called Poverty Inc. And on Poverty Inc., what they talk about is how there are nonprofit organizations that will go around looking for something terrible that has happened to somebody, look for somebody's trauma, somebody's poverty, somebody's despair, and they will package that and market it the same way you market a pair of Air Jordans. And they will use that trauma, tragedy, and despair to raise money for their organization. All the visuals and the imagery and the sad music of the little starving children, or the tsunami, or the hurricane in Haiti, things like that. Or not hurricane, I'm sorry, the earthquake in Haiti. And what happens is they then sort of position themselves as almost like a gatekeeper, so to speak, almost like a paternalistic figure to say, give us money and we're going to go help these people. They're not saying give money to those people. They're saying give money to us and we will make sure that we help those people. What do you think about that in terms of that description I just drew up, and how do you think that relates to Black Lives Matter? And then, of course, you can add anything else you'd like to add onto that, Tony.
Right. Well, I think I mean, that's a perfect description. I think this is what happens when we don't vet the institutions that represent themselves as fighting for justice for Black people. It's like, honestly, it's like Black folks are getting betrayed every week. And it's like we're normalizing being made fools of publicly by always entrusting our movements to other people to manage. And this type of betrayal, the constant betrayal, is demoralizing. It tells other communities that they can exploit our trauma and cash in on our deaths, just like the way that you see how they did with Mike Brown. I mean, they literally use our dead bodies as props for the movements that they build that we don't really tangibly benefit from in any way. And it's basically a way of using the Black community as a footstool to reach their own agendas that we end up following anyway. So I think that we really need to start paying better attention to these social justice movements, who's behind these movements, where the money's going. I mean, I know Sister Zakiya, she spoke about certain Black Lives Matter chapters, the ones that put out the open letter, but there was actually a response from the Black Lives Matter Foundation, where they're not even acknowledging all of them as, I guess, legitimate members of the network. So that diminishes the pool of resources. We were talking about how they gave, I think, what was it? We said $26 million to other Black Lives Matter chapters. So we're
about 30 million, something like that.
Yeah, I read about 30 million, and it just said gave out 30 million somewhere. They didn't really specify where it went.
So if of those 10 chapters that put out, that basically call them out publicly, they didn't receive anything, right? And they're saying, well, all of you aren't even really totally affiliated. Can we get like a real breakdown of who is considered actually Black Lives Matter, who's supposed to be getting designated this amount of money, and who isn't? Because if you look at the original mission statement, so to speak, that was put out by the founders of Black Lives Matter, it was a pledge that they were supposed to be a decentralized movement that's governed by a consensus of a members collective. So who is that members collective? Because from what I'm seeing, it seems like they're leaving a lot of those people out.
Exactly.
Well, everybody, if you just tuned in, we're talking about Black Lives Matter and Michael Brown Sr. Michael Brown's father basically said Black Lives Matter should write a check for $20 million to the city of Ferguson for their activism, and that he's only received $500 from the organization, which has raised $90 million. A lot of it from what happened with his son, a few years ago. And if you could, please hit the thumbs up button, share button, and subscribe button. And so I want to ask you guys this, and I guess I'll circle back to you, Zakiya. You talked about that nonprofit industrial complex, and nobody's accusing Black Lives Matter of not ever doing anything good for anybody. I know a lot of good people that joined up with the movement because they really agree that Black Lives Matter. I think we can all agree on that. And it seemed to me that there was just this question of what exactly is this? Who's really in charge? Why are you collecting all this money on our behalf? These corporations. It almost feels a little bit insulting because you see the community at large is not feeling any impact from any of the funds being raised. But you're reading every other day about major corporations that are giving millions of dollars to causes. And I thought, I'm gonna tell you the truth, Zakiya, I thought they were giving the money to Black Lives Matter, and I was seeing big numbers, 10 million. 50 million, 30 million, these multi-million. So when they said 90 million, I thought that number was a little bit small. That made me wonder, where's the rest of the money being donated to? What are they doing? Like what's happening?
I think that's what remains to be seen. Keep in mind, this is what they're reporting. There is no transparency still. And I would be remiss not to name some of the organizations who are doing the work on the ground. This is really criminal, in my opinion. Black people, especially during this pandemic, have sank economically to new lows. I'm talking to people every day all across this country who are struggling, families, children. We got tent cities where I live in Washington, D.C. huge tent cities. I saw a video on Twitter just yesterday in Jacksonville, Florida, tent cities for miles filled with Black people, mostly of descendants of enslaved Africans. So I'm very concerned that, you know, the money that has been given after the death, another death of a Black man, George Floyd, is not getting to the people that actually need it. We really need to ask some serious questions to the founders. We see Alicia Garza all over. She got a book out now that she's, you know, making a lot of money on. These, again, some of these people, and this is not necessarily about hating, because you got Black Lives Matter chapters, which the DC chapter is a recognized chapter. Let's just be honest about that. It is a recognized chapter. Some of the chapters they claim they don't recognize, but why not? Who are you, right? If these organizations are doing work for Black people in their local communities, that money needs to be given directly to the people. This is one of the reasons why I don't like intermediaries. This is one of the reasons why I don't like all of these gatekeepers, because that's what it is. They're gatekeeping. And there's, to me, after reading the New York Times article, there's more questions. If you said you spent a quarter, where's the 30 million or a third or whatever? Where is it? What did you spend it on? Did it go to the three founders and they split it? I'm serious. I'm dead serious. Did y'all get 10 million each? What's happening? And I think that, you know, and the other thing that I have to tell you, because I think most of you all know that I work in this industry, and I have been involved in grassroots organizing and more so on the professional level in the last 7 years. But I started off organically. I had no connections to white wealth like Alicia Garza. She actually had very deep connections. She's not from Oakland. Let's be honest. She's from Marin. Marin is a wealthy community in the Bay Area. And so this idea of Black folks who are organizing in their local communities, not having access to these dollars to actually be able to scale and hold people accountable, I think that's why you're seeing more tent cities. I think that's why you're seeing more Black people sink, because we don't have access to the kind of wealth that we need. And we know why. Centuries of institutional and systemic racism and centuries of us actually being the commodity. So I think that for me, the New York Times article is just more questions. And finally, I'll wrap up and say this, boys. One of the things that I thought was very interesting is the choice of the New York Times to tell this story. So instead of having a family meeting, you could have had a closed door family meeting. When they wrote that open letter to the founders of the Black Lives Matter, why not give these organizations a call? They Black people. These are Black people who are hurting. These are Black people who are working in their communities. And I know the Black Lives Matter DC organization personally. I see their work. They're not acting. They're not for show or just asking for money because they want some money. They're out there risking their lives, putting their bodies on the line behind all of the police killings that's happening right here in Washington, D.C. Why didn't you pick up the phone and say, let's have a conversation? You went to the New York Times because guess what? At that level of activism, because it's an industry, at that level of activism, you got relationships with reporters at New York Times. You want to know how I know that? Because I got relationships with reporters. I already know how the game goes. You call the reporter and say, listen, we got this issue on our hand. We need a reliable source. Because who's going to question the New York Times? We need a reliable journalistic industry to tell this story. Can you do it for me? There was a handshake involved with that. That's my assessment.
Okay, so one of the things I know a lot of people, Jeff, were upset about with Black Lives Matter was that when they read that original. Well, I'm still stuck on remembering what I read when I went to blacklivesmatter.org, and I was just stunned that one of the statements made was something about disrupting the nuclear family or something. And I think a lot of Black folks are like, whoa, wait a minute. Whoa, you're trying to destroy our families. Like, what? Like Joe Biden did that. Like, what like, that job is finished. Like, like, what are you talking about? And then when you read through and you saw a lot of a lot of the talk. We people can identify the talk. The white liberal talk. The transphobia and things like that, which is fine, right? There's nothing against any particular group of people, but it definitely said that they were coming at blackness from a particular angle. Perhaps it's a justifiable angle, in the eyes of many. It's not an angle that I'm here to fight about, but it's certainly one of those things where you say, okay, I don't know if this is really like me. I don't know if this represents me. And it's not just and the hard part, here's where it seems like they catch you is they'll use a term that you can't disagree with, like Black Lives Matter. And you're like, well, yeah, I agree, Black Lives Matter, but let's talk about the organization. Well, a lot of people don't get past the term Black Lives Matter. So next thing you know, NBA players are wearing Black Lives Matter on their jerseys, and everybody's carrying this slogan around, really representing what is effectively a white liberal organization in blackface. That's what a lot of people saw it as, and it made a lot of people very uncomfortable. So what do you think is going on in terms of just how the community feels about Black Lives Matter? It's almost like the money problem is just a continuation of other problems people already had when they started pulling back the layers to really see, okay, what's really going on here.
Well, I think people are starting to really, because when the George Floyd, that's the thing, when these tragic events happen, they're so tragic and so egregious that a lot of rational thinking goes out the window, right? When George Floyd gets killed on camera, or Michael Brown gets killed on camera, or you hear about the story of Trayvon Martin, a lot of people they automatically run towards your people. You try to, it garners families together because you don't want that to happen. That could be your son or your brother or your cousin or whoever. So it makes you closer to the people around you. And so therefore, when you have an organization on surface, at least on the surface, that looks like it's going to help and try to prevent things like that from happening, then you go to run the support before ever really educating yourself on what's going on. And I think that's how Black Lives Matter as the organization, the grandioso organization, the big dog, has been able to capitalize. Because like I said, when these tragic events happen to our people, you're reminded of the history of America and what's happened to our people over the course of our duration here. Now, but what's starting to happen is now people are getting educated, right? Like Zakiya said, the local chapters are calling out the big dog, and now the big dog is having to answer questions that they don't really have answers to, right? So for an example, one of the articles that I read, the Patrice Cullors, I don't know if I'm saying her name right. She's one of the co-founders. Right. Yeah, she's one of the co-founders. She came out to the Griot, which is another interesting source to go to, and said that, hey, we really haven't been able to make ends meet before 2020. She said 2020 was the real year that we had a surplus amount of money, essentially. Like before, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me, because it looks like these big corporations haven't been just donating. Now, I get it. 2020 might have been your cash cow year, but to say you've barely been able to make ends meet over the previous 7 years just that didn't sound right. Maybe I'm delusional, but I feel like organizations have been donating to Black Lives Matter over the duration of its existence. So just to say that you haven't been making money before that, it just that baffled me. Also, so besides saying that, you're saying that you have this surplus of 60 million. We have questions about where the first 30 million at, and we might not ever get those answers. So with this 60 million, we're still in a pandemic. Our people are still hurting. Our people are still starving. Our people, like Zakiya said, are in tent cities. That 60 million could go to help those people. There's no way you should just be sitting on $60 million and not helping the people that are in need. And that is mind blowing.
Interesting. Well, let me read some of this to you. By the way, everybody, please hit the thumbs up button, share button, subscribe button. We're talking about Black Lives Matter and Michael Brown Sr., the father of Michael Brown Jr., basically saying that they need to write him a check for $20 million. And which I want to ask y'all about that too. I want to ask y'all specifically about $20 million, and if y'all think that that's crazy talk on his part, if y'all think that that's an accurate number, etc. I'd be curious to know.
He should have asked for more.
I think that's more than fair. I think he should definitely have gotten more, because that entire movement was pretty much spearheaded by the death of his son. And for that man that man and his family to not receive, anything from that, even though he's still out there fighting for justice under, with different organizations, rights as well. And even the money that they're demanding right now. They've already laid out a blueprint of exactly how that money is going to be spent. So even in that, you see how respectable that is, because let's be straight up. When our Black children get murdered by police, what happens? There's never any justice, right? And then if maybe sometimes there'll be some type of a civil recovery or something. But at the end of the day, they lost a child. So why would you view this in any other way than for a significant portion of those proceeds going to the family? So I think it's really insulting that Mike Brown Sr. even has to even make such a request. Why hasn't there been any real communication with him? And to the earlier point that Jeff made, they've been collecting a lot of money since, let's say, definitely since 2015. So we're only talking about the money that we saw last year. We're only talking about the $90 million that was reported last year, which, by the way, is the year that they actually filed to become a nonprofit. So I think there are a lot of things that we need to be looking at as far as the finances are concerned with this, because at the end of the day, you got to follow the money. Well,
that's right. Follow the money.
Did Michael Brown's father or his family get a settlement out of that? Like, what happened with that? What was the legal? Because a lot of the families, I know Breonna Taylor's family got some money, and a few other families did. Did Michael Brown's family get anything? And anybody in the audience that knows can feel free to answer.
I'm not sure about that, but I know the officer that killed him, he cashed out like a millionaire from GoFundMe. So that's someone who actually made money off of that.
The other thing I wanted to point out, and I don't know if y'all remember this, when Hillary Clinton was running in 2016, Samaria Rice made a political decision not to be pimped by the Democratic Party.
Yes.
And I got to shout that sister out from Cleveland, Ohio. Now, being from Ohio, I don't know if y'all remember, but the very first Black Lives Matter convening was in Cleveland because of Tamir Rice. That's why I keep bringing up Samaria Rice. Her family deserves justice, and certainly deserves access to some of that money that Black Lives Matter has been collecting. As you know, just November or December of last year, Trump's DOJ said that they were not going to file civil rights charges against the officer who killed Tamir Rice.
Yeah, I remember that.
We can't forget that. Can't forget that. Money, and don't get me wrong, can't nobody kill neither one of my kids, and enough money is gonna be enough. I mean, you see what I'm saying? It's not about that. But if people are out here collecting money on the bodies of dead Black boys and men, and the movement doesn't even center Black boys and men, we ain't even got on that.
Yeah.
But now the movement doesn't even mention Black men at all. And if they do mention Black men, it's in a way that is pathological. And that, to me, as a Black woman, who identifies as an Africana woman, to me is also very problematic. You are a multimillionaire off of the bodies of dead Black boys and men, but Black men are also hoteps. Black men are also all this other stuff that y'all got from the academy. Nah.
Interesting. Well, check this out. So I was reading online about some of the money, that Black Lives Matter has raised. And there, a lot of people are very confused about the total amounts, as everybody in this panel has mentioned. And I'm reading here on ABC News's website is that basically they were talking, for example, one of many donations. There's a wrestler by the name of John Cena who matched $1 million. There was $1 million donation given by a group. He matched that $1 million, and they were all given to Black Lives Matter according to the site. Now, one thing that's interesting about Black Lives Matter is that they use that site called Act Blue, which is typically used to raise money for the Democratic Party. And a lot of people have inferred that this means that they're pretty much representing the Democratic Party. And just tying on to the issue in order to get votes and to get funding to the party. So do you think that this money is going indirectly somehow to, I don't know if it will be to some sort of super PAC or something that's actually funding political candidates for the Democrats?
Follow the money.
Follow the money. Okay. Well, let me read some of this to y'all. It says, when I look up Wikipedia and you look up Black Lives Matter, it says Black Lives Matter is a decentralized political and social movement protesting against incidents of police brutality and all racially motivated violence against Black people. While there are specific organizations such as the Black Lives Matter Global Network that label themselves simply as Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement comprises a broad array of people and organizations. The slogan Black Lives Matter itself remains untrademarked by any group. The broader movement and its related organizations typically advocate against police violence toward Black people, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what they're saying here is that July 2013, the movement began with the hashtag Black Lives Matter on social media after the acquittal of George Zimmerman. Now, the Black Lives Matter Global Network is of interest to me because I remember when they formed the Black Lives Matter Global Network in response to that open letter that was written by several Black Lives Matter chapters. And I know y'all remember that, where in this letter, 10 chapters stepped up and said, y'all hoarding the money, you're kind of pushing us out, and you claim to represent us, but we're not getting any sort of decision-making power. We're not getting any sort of transparency. Basically, it sounded like they were kind of doing a Umar Johnson on them, like it's like, shut up, don't ask me about the money. Why are you asking about?
I'm so glad you brought up Umar, because people in our community, you know, have been like, where the money go? Where the money? Where the money? Hotep, all of this. But you don't see that same energy with this, though. I don't know if y'all see the same energy that people went after Umar.
No, right. I agree.
Well,
I agree.
I think part of that is because, like I said, it plays on the traumas, right? So you don't want to look insensitive, and it almost goes back to that liberal democratic media type stuff. If you go into really diving in, it's like, where's our money at? And until now, and Michael Brown Sr. is probably the perfect person to do it, because his son is what catapulted this organization to a new stratosphere, or the death of his son there is. And so any other person or organization, right? Like, you kind of look insensitive because these people are supposed to be helping our people out, dealing with the different problems that are happening in our community, especially after the death of a lot of these individuals, right? And so what Michael Brown Sr. can come out and say, like, no, my son did pass away, and I've seen $500 in 7 years. That's all. Right. Like, you told me you got 90 million last year, and my son died in 2014, and I've seen $500 for my organization that's been up and going and running without your help.
And and even if that's true, you raised all that money in 1 year. How much y'all gave the George Floyd family? Because that's what y'all raised it off of. How much did George Floyd's family get?
Trauma is what exempts them from accountability in the end. Absolutely. Because the worst decision, the most damaging decisions that people can make are always going to be in the midst of duress or some type of emotion. So this is why these movements, they play on that. They play on our emotions. This is when they're going to galvanize people to get involved and, donate their money or see other people collect money because, they're reporting to do everything.
But this is why you have to tell people to support local organizations.
You're not questioning anything. You're not questioning anything because, one, you don't want to look, like you're insensitive. But at the same time, you're also not questioning anything because as Black people, we understand that trauma and we're very reactive when it comes to things like that. So they know how to take advantage of that stuff, throw a little bit of symbolism at us, and we're fine with that while everybody else collects the bag. And this is what it is. And this is why I say we have to be careful when it comes to identifying allies, especially when it comes to white liberals and progressives. Now, I'm not saying I have anything particularly against white people being allies, but I think when it comes to white liberals and progressive allyship, I think that they view the fight for justice with a completely different lens from Black people, and their approach to it is through paternalism, it's through ownership, and it's through a lot of privilege. And when you call them out on that privilege, usually it ends up with them just kind of defaulting to labeling you. You're a Trump supporter. You're a Republican, or come on, you're racist. They call you as a Black person racist, or you're a phobe.
Yeah, you're a coon. You're a Candace Owens. You know what I mean? Like, you get these labels. Yeah,
and they do all of that just to fend you off and to fend off their own cognitive dissonance, because cognitive dissonance is a real thing, because it's very difficult for a person to face the truth about the lie that they've been living. That's very difficult for a person to resolve within themselves. So as a white person, if you're going through life thinking that, I donate to Black Lives Matter, or I have a couple of black friends and all that. You think that you've done the job. You know, I haven't called anyone the N-word. So you think that that's what it is. You know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, when it comes to our movements, you're a guest. You're a visitor. You're supposed to sit back and listen. But unfortunately, they play on our collective low self-esteem as black people, where we feel like we always have to defer to them to manage our movements. They play on that. They capitalize upon it. So at the end of the day, you can say you have good intentions, but when you think about it, somebody's cashing in on black pain, black death, and black trauma. And it ain't us.
Well, it ultimately, I mean, it's ultimately another form of white supremacy. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. It's, you know, there's liberal white supremacy and conservative white supremacy. And so when you talk, when you want to talk about, you know, the hillbillies that stormed the Capitol and the white supremacists that stormed the Capitol, that's fine. But let's also talk about the white supremacists who were running around throwing bricks through windows and burning down buildings, you know, and whatever. And some of them screaming Black Lives Matter. But really, you know, the question is, how much do you actually respect black people? And if the way I would process it almost is that when you see when white people get real passionate about certain liberal causes, like maybe you know, saving the tigers in South America or protecting dogs. They don't really want to hear. They don't want the dogs to lead the movement. They don't want to go ask the dogs what they think. They know what's best for the dogs, right? That's kind of their mindset, right? So in a way, we are the dogs. We are literally still 3/5 of a human being or less in their minds, to the point where when we step up and say, no, that's not what we want. We want something different. They step forward again in that white supremacist tradition and say, no, that's not what you want. This is what you want. There was a black cop out in Oregon that was actually talking about how baffled he was that he would have these screaming white people in his face, you know, talking about Black Lives Matter or whatever. And he would start talking to a black person and trying to connect with the protesters, say, look, I'm your brother. We're connected, blah, blah, blah. And he said, lo and behold, every single time a white person would come up and say, don't you talk to him. Stop talking to him. and he said, I didn't understand that. And I agree with that. I just personally think that in many cases, sometimes you just want to say, just get out, just leave, just go away. Just, especially when, and I'm leaving on this point, you know, the fact that they got some of y'all so backwards, some of our people so backwards in the mind that you literally were calling Ice Cube a sellout because Ice Cube was saying he wanted something for black people, means you are about the most fucked up human being I've ever met. The fact that somebody could step up and say, we want something for black people, and you're like, no, you're an Uncle Tom, you're a Trump supporter, but yet you're up here just, you know, singing the praises of every Negro in the Democratic Party. That means that's just a lack of intelligence. I mean, that's literally explaining the entire formula regarding why black people have no power. You wonder why we have no power? That's exactly why, because you do stupid stuff like that, right? So I'm gonna stop talking. Zakia, I'm sure you got something to say. You're a smart lady, so I'm not even gonna ask you a question. I'm just gonna let you go ahead and take the mic. Go ahead, sister.
No, this is all good. And the point that I was trying to make when Brother Tony Lindsay was speaking is that this is why I advocate for black people to support local organizations.
That's right.
There are black people organizing in your community, whether you believe it or not, especially if you're in a bigger city, even in small rural cities. That's what's in us. That's what we do. And I say that as a small organization co-founder, founded in an experience that black people experience all the time with our children, which is the school to prison pipeline. I can name the local organizations that I know that are legit in this country, that all of that money could have gone to, that would have built black power. The problem is that these three people, I would say two, because I don't think Opal is involved as the other two. But seriously, I don't think these other two are interested in actual black power. You know, otherwise they wouldn't be raising that amount of money if they weren't trusted figures. Let's just be real about that. There's no way in heck that they would be at the stewardship of that kind of money if they had a mindset of black power. So let's get that out of the way right now. So in terms of building black power, that's something that we have to collectively do. That those of us who do work, those of us, you know, who are really concerned about our people, especially those of us as at the bottom, poor and working class Black folks, fund your local grassroots organization. They're the ones, just because you don't see them on TV and they don't have all the glitz and glamour, don't mean that they're not doing real work. In fact, I will argue that the ones that you see on TV aren't doing the real work because they on TV.
Right.
That's true. Yeah,
Right.
but if you remember when there was this whole just going back to that Ice Cube thing, just because that was on my brain today. Most of the people, I thought about it, and most regular people were not saying that he was a sellout for advocating for Black people. The people who were saying it were the Negroes on TV. The Negroes on TV who had been propped up were the ones who were quick to say, like, let me go, like almost like they were doing the job. It was like a seek and destroy mission where they would say, okay, I want to interview him so I can discredit him on behalf of the person I work for. When I did a poll with but again, the Black folks that follow us, they have a strong Black identity. So this is not a random sample by any stretch, but it was hundreds of thousands of people, and 90-something% of them were in complete approval and support of what Ice Cube was doing. At least they understood, even if they didn't agree completely, they understood. But on TV, you would think that he was the devil for doing this. And this goes back to, if you read books like Black Labor, White Wealth, which is really the whole story of reparations. I mean, they're talking about they're going to study reparations for 7 years to decide if they need to pay. That's the funniest thing in the world. If you follow for that, then I got a bridge in Brooklyn I want to sell you. Because basically, literally, they're like, imagine somebody owes you money. And they're like, well, let me spend 7 years studying whether or not I owe you money. And everybody saw you take it. It's on camera. We got all the evidence. We know the exact amount down to the penny, but you need 7 years to figure out how much you owe me. That makes me a fool.
You've already owed me for 200 years, by the way. Like, it's been like
Exactly.
200 years you've owed this to me, and we're gonna study it for 7 more. Like,
Man, it's dumb. But long story short, it's the media kind of playing this weird game with Black folks, and I think that we have to kind of know the difference, right? So to Zakia's point, you said that there's a difference between the local chapters or the local organizations and the national, and we should support the local, not the national.
I meant like just local organizations, not just BLM chapters. There's a lot of local Black-led grassroots organizations doing real work in communities. We just don't hear about them because they are a Black power building base, and and the powers that be don't want people to know about them, right? That's the strategy.
and to your point, when you think about, like Tony mentioned earlier about following the money, I see that you see the national groups, you see Black Lives Matter, NAACP, or Urban League, groups like that are out there, even the Congressional Black Caucus to some extent. Where are they getting their money from? If they brought in $50 million last year, they didn't collect all that money from Black people, right? Black people are not the ones propping up the NAACP. Well, who is? Well, white supremacist corporations and organizations, government figures, etc. So that's who they work for. That's who they work for. And I think it's important for people to just understand that they don't work for you. They work for them. They work for their bosses, their masses. Now, in terms of local organizations, how do we support them? How do we really build that power base? Well, yes, financially is very important. That financial maturity of understanding that you must support the things you believe in, very important. But also we can support these organizations with our credibility. I don't believe you if you come along and you are the NAACP or whatever. I need to know what your motivation is, what the incentive is for you to even do any of this. So I will just say that when you talk about supporting, I think it's bigger than even just the money. It's literally also just with the credibility. And I think Black Lives Matter has lost a lot of credibility. Tony, what do you think? Do you think that the credibility of just the Black Lives Matter global network itself has kind of been put in jeopardy at this point?
Well, yes, absolutely. Like, that's like one of the main arguments I've been making for this. And if you just think about politics in general, or anything, like, you're going to trust local politics more than you're going to trust national politics. You're going to trust, the local activists that are out there on the ground in the community. You're going to, relate to them more than you will to, the mainstream organizers that you see on MSNBC and CNN all the time, because there's a disconnect there. And I feel like the closer you get, well, I guess the more success and wealth you amass in the mainstream and these political circles, that's the closer you get to this white supremacist system. That's the more proximity you have to these people. And therefore it's a lot more likely to find some sort of corrupting. So I think the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement, it originally purported itself as a decentralized movement, that was important. But we're seeing that that's really not what's happening here, because in a decentralized movement, there are like so many parts. There's no, one entity that is basically collecting all the money, making all the decisions, but you're kind of seeing that happening with the Black Lives Matter Global. They're collecting all of this money and all of the people that they said were a part of this network, not just in funding, in collecting funds, but also in decision making. They're just nothing.
Well, it sounds like they're decentralized when it comes to doing the work, but not decentralized when it comes to the money and the power. Right? Like that's
right.
It ain't decentralized from that.
I mean, you talk about, you want to talk about white supremacist, type structures that we see it all the time. I mean, have you ever seen a corporation? Tell me in the chat, anybody who's ever seen this, where you have a company that says we believe in diversity, right? So they'll go hire a bunch of black people, but they'll all be at the lower rung of the company and doing all the grunt work. But when it comes to getting the money and the power, they keep that to themselves. The diversity, I am a very big skeptic of America ever really being committed to diversity, because I don't know if it's natural to share power like that. I don't know if people want to do that. People don't. I don't want to do that. And you come in my house, I'll be like, yeah, we're diverse. We'll let anybody come in who's from any background. But I'm running this house. This is me and Alicia run this house. Like, ain't gonna be the kids don't even run the house. Like, no, we're not sharing power. We're not sharing resources unless we right. So I just kind of think that when you're talking about the Black Lives Matter Global Network, it is utterly fascinating that they really went out of their way to say we're decentralized, and almost again that leftist ideology, leftist communist socialist kind of mindset, like, oh, we're power to the people, blah blah blah. But when you when you start talking about $100 million or almost that much, and a lot of power and a lot of influence, who's going to sit next to President Biden at the function? There's not a lot of people that are able to really get into that hall of power, and I don't think they're receiving that money and saying, okay, let's split the money evenly amongst the chapters. They're saying we're going to keep the money, but we'll split up the work. That's what I'm saying. Jeff.
Yeah, when you start talking about stuff that's important, right, like the money or the power, things like that, instead of getting real answers, we get to work on Washington on Martin Luther King Day, right? Like that's the type of stuff that we get in replacement. And don't believe me, go check the Black Lives Matter Instagram page, and we did a whole panel about it, how they literally had somebody twerking on Washington and memorializing of Dr. Martin Luther King on his day, recognized here in the United States of America. So that's just crazy. And the fact that we do have big time people who have huge followings. What I mean by big time people that, like I said, have huge followings, they either appear on television or they have really big YouTube platforms or whatever, that tell you can't get anything for your vote, that anything was better than Trump, that a Trump America is the worst type of America ever, right? Like, and don't expect executive orders in your name or specific laws or specific agendas passed for just black people, because that's not possible. Like, those are the same people that are telling you that'll go and tell you to go support something like a Black Lives Matter as an organization, and then sit there and cry and wonder why black people are still at the bottom of the totem pole. Sit here and cry and wonder why black people are still having the same fight in 2021 that they had in 1965. Like, it's because of this type of messaging and this type of symbolism that has continued to plague our community.
All right. So everybody, we're talking about Black Lives Matter, and Michael Brown's father has basically said, pay up. He asked for $20 million to support local activists in Ferguson. But there are also chapters, 10 chapters in particular, that wrote an open letter wondering where the money is. You've got a lot of money being given on behalf of black suffering, and a lot of black people were wondering, okay, when these checks are being written, who's getting these checks, who gets to control the resources, etc. And so what I would like to do with my panelists, Jeff Lightsey Jr. and Tony Lindsay and Zakia Sankara Jabbar. I said it right? I'm gonna keep practicing. I promise. Forgive me for my ignorance.
It's easy. It's not even that hard.
It's not even a hard name. I know what's wrong with me. God, boys, come on. Anyway, I would like for every panelist, if you could, starting with Mrs. Zakia, if you could please give maybe like a 90-second closing statement, so we can all just kind of walk away as smarter people, process these things a little bit better, and not keep falling for the okie doke. I'll allow you to go first. Ladies first.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, boys. It's always good to come on the platform and have these real, authentic conversations that we usually can't have other places. Want to make sure people can check me out on Real Talk with ZSJ as well on YouTube. You can come on over there and check out what's happening there. But, you know, one of the things that I'll say just to kind of wrap this up is that we have to begin to rebuild trust in our community, and we have to take control over the narrative and control over the organizing and advocacy in our community. That's how we can avoid the things that we're discussing today. You know, what's happening with BLM is certainly not something that the masses of Black people actually support. In fact, most of the people that I talk to and most of the people that I'm in community with, which are mainly poor and working class Black folks, don't identify with a lot of the things that BLM espouses, right? And it's academic jargon. It's not the language of the community. A lot of the things that they talk about. And so that is one of the things that I believe is and the reason why I believe we should support local organizing, organic grassroots organizing. We have got to get away from this idea where we pathologize people in our community because they don't have the right language. They're not doing the right thing because I went to college and I got a bachelor's degree in women and gender studies, and this is the language we're supposed to use, and you're a hotep if you don't do it. I think that's ridiculous. That is the worst way to organize poor and working people. And finally, we have got to get back to centering economics. Economics, that's what Black people need to be talking about, what we need to be making sure that we are going to be good as we continue to move forward with this fourth industrial revolution. Y'all know I'm always talking about that. That just means that the economy is going to be much more automated, run by lots of things will be run by artificial intelligence and all of those things. So again, like I said, follow me or subscribe to Real Talk with ZSJ. I talk about a lot of these things, you know, on my YouTube channel, and be sure to tune in on Tuesday as well. There's going to be a debate between Brother Omawali Africa and another brother about reparations and whether we'll get reparations without Pan-Africanism. Thanks, boys.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So Jeff Lightsey Jr., before I step to you, I want everybody to know I went down to blacklivesmatter.org today, and they used to have this really long about statement where they really told on themselves, right? They didn't learn the first rule of COINTELPRO propaganda is don't blow your cover, because they were way super honest and I know that kind of liberal language. You know, I've been a college professor for a long time on these campuses. It's a blueprint for an interesting kind of indoctrination. That kind of, unfortunately, if you take it too seriously, you go back home to your community and you start explaining to everybody in your community why they're ignorant. You start telling your grandparents why they're stupid, and y'all know what I'm talking about. You know, the liberal arts student that went to Brown University and comes back using all this weird language that everybody's like, that's stupid. Nobody wants to hear you.
Toxic masculinity, homophobe,
right. Toxic
stuff like that. Yeah.
What are your pronouns? And just stuff that people just are like, come on, we got real problems.
That's what I meant, boys. When I said poor Black people ain't talking about that shit. Excuse me. I mean, when you go into the hood, we're not using that language. Yeah. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a better relationship with our Black family members who do identify as LGBTQ. So let me just be real clear about that, because I have family members, we all do, that are LGBTQ. But this Eurocentric, white dominated language and culture, nah, we ain't got to do that. We know how to love our people. White liberals not going to tell us how to love our people.
There you go.
Right, or tell us that we don't love our people, right? Tell us that we're scared of our people, right? Like, that's what phobia means, to be scared of something. And I promise you, I'm not scared of these people.
Yeah, well, but it's funny you talk about just all this stuff that spins out of it. Even when you talk about things like the cancel culture, and and the way you see things like, okay, a guy who decides he wants to be a woman can go compete in women's sports. And how ridiculous that looks, how hilarious. I mean, women getting their arms and legs broken by these dudes that decided they identify as a woman. And then someone says, "Oh, you're transphobic because you're challenging that." And it's like, no, you have a problem with common sense. Like, you're common sense phobic because this don't make no damn sense. I ain't sending my little black daughters out there on a field to compete with a guy with in testicles. No. I don't care. I don't care how much makeup he wears, how long his skirt is, how long his hair is. He's not competing with my daughters, period. He can be a girl all day long if he wants to, but when they get on that sports field, that there's a difference, right?
Or go in the locker room, have to change and things like that as well, like that.
Exactly. And so let me just read a little bit, Jeff, and I want you to go next, but I got to read. I was looking on the Black Lives Matter about the about section of their website, and they're not telling themselves as much. Their little about section, it used to be this long, now it's super short. And so they evolved as people started kind of going and reading the website. They say black people don't read, but that's not true. Some of us do. And a lot of us do. Most of us do. And one thing that they said here is that we are expansive. We are a collection of liberators who believe in an inclusive and spacious movement. We also believe that in order to win, to bring as many people with us as along the way, we must move beyond the narrow nationalism, which I guess that would be people like us, that is all too prevalent in black communities. So to me, the contrast to nationalism, I would imagine, would be more leftist ideas or integrationist ideas.
That's on their website right now. They're shitting on nationalism.
Well, they said they want to move away from nationalism, which
wow.
Malcolm X was a black nationalist.
I hadn't read that. I don't even go to their website because I haven't seen that.
Yeah, well, let me read more. This is interesting. It
wow.
says, we affirm the lives of black, queer, and trans folks, disabled folks, undocumented folks, right? So when you talk about trans and queer, disabled, undocumented, that's a white liberal agenda. I mean, there's not, that's not really a black movement. That's a type of black movement. That's saying, okay, we have a movement and there are black people in the movement. But that's very different from saying we represent black people and all the different sort of varieties of black people that there are, right? So there are certain black people who are not being represented by Black Lives Matter. And I think it's important for those who are not represented by the movement to just identify that so you can find something that does represent you. So let me read more, and then I'm gonna pass the ball to Jeff. It says, so they affirm the lives of black, queer, and trans folks, disabled folks, undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all black lives. So I agree with that. I agree with the part about women and folks with records. I identify with that as well. But they also said in all black lives along the gender spectrum. So in this statement, in this one sentence that defines sort of whose lives they affirm, they mention sexuality or gender about 3 different times: queer, trans, along the gender spectrum. So that, again, that's that subtle piece that kind of tells you sort of where this comes from. This comes out of some gender studies class at Yale, or some sort of white university sort of setting. It's not something that reflects grassroots black people who are just saying, how do we survive? How do we build? How do we keep ourselves safe? How do we have some assets to pass to our kids? How do we get reparations? Things like that. There's a bigger spectrum of blackness that goes beyond just the whole centering on police shootings. I'm not going to talk about police brutality. We're not talking about criminal justice. We're not talking about what happens in prison. We're really talking about that one little narrow slither of unarmed black men being shot by the police, which is which is tragic. But there's less than 50 unarmed black men shot by police each year. So that means that there's thousands more of black people that are being affected, millions more actually, that are being affected in a multitude of ways that have to be addressed as well. So Jeff, go ahead with your final statement. I did not mean to talk so long, please.
No, you're fine. So like when you narrow it down that much, like I said, it takes away from the fight against like white supremacy, right, to just the fight against unarmed black shooting. And that should never be the whole entire pie, right? Your fight is to help black people advance, the advancement of black people, and to fight against white supremacy. That umbrella covers everything. It covers your genders, it covers your you know what I'm saying? It covers all of that stuff that you talked about, but instead you try to make it very specific because, like you said, you're following an agenda. Black Lives Matter, you have $30 million. It sounds like that's gone to waste. Okay, whatever. That's $60 million. I can tell you a few folks that can help you spend that $60 million that will impact the community in the right way. Dr. Claude Anderson is on speed dial. You can get in contact with him. Here's someone that can help you spend that $60 million in the right way. Ice Cube is someone that can help you use that $60 million to help spend it in the right way. And this man right here, Dr. Boyce, can point you in the direction to help you use that $60 million to actually impact and help our people. So for those who are saying we're sitting with $60 million in the bank, $60 million can change the lives of millions of Black people across this country. Get in contact with these people, make it happen. That is my plea to you. And by the way, Mosh Teray from Black Guns Matter will be on our platform this Sunday, so check it out. He is going to have a lot to say about stuff like this.
Yeah. Jeff is every day. He's live on the blackbosschannel.com. And I'll put the URL up there on the screen. If you want to hear what Black men think, check out the blackbosschannel.com. FlyNubianQueenTV.com is where Vicky Dillard and Jade Arundel and a lot of other sisters speak every day. So check out Fly Nubian Queen for women and the Black Boss Channel for men. And that's kind of how we do it here. We like to let people go into their spaces and really truly be heard so that we can find our common ground. I think that's really important. So Tony Lindsay, my man, what's your final thought, brother? I think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
Okay, yeah. Well, I just wanted to caution people to beware of the diversity trap. We get convinced that the dominant society is trying to help us through their commitment to diversity quite often. But the truth is, like, the only true way to achieve diversity would be through equity. But for that to happen, the privilege will have to concede a certain amount of their own power. Now, I'm not very confident that that's going to happen. So that's why I believe we need to create, manage, and control our own movements, because if we don't, we're just going to always be stuck with these white liberal influence movements and policies that always end up adversely affecting the same communities, the same disenfranchised communities that they purport to be fighting for. So, once again, I just believe that we all need to stop deferring to our oppressors or their ideology for the solutions to our problems.
All right. Well, I love it. Well, everybody, if you could give a digital thank you to our panelists, Ms. Zakia Sankara Jabbar, Jeff Lightsey Jr. from the Black Boss Channel, and Zakia's show is called Real. Give me the title again, Ms. Zakia.
Yep, it's right there in the handle. Real Talk with ZSJ. Want to make sure people subscribe. We have good conversation over there. And Boyce, I keep telling you, I want you to come on, man. I got to get you over there on my channel.
Of course.
I want us to talk stocks, though. Let's do it.
Okay, we can talk about whatever you want. Anything you want, I will talk about it. And Tony Lindsay, tell everybody the name of your movie again.
Oh, yeah. The name of the movie is Where Hearts Lie.
Where Hearts Lie.
Yeah, you can pretty much find it streaming everywhere now. It's on Urban Flix, Tubi, Amazon Video. It's all over the place.
All right. Where Hearts Lie. Okay, great. So everybody, thank you guys for hanging out with us. We're going to come back and sort of follow up on this. Obviously no animosity toward Black Lives Matter or the creators of the organization. They represent what they represent, right? They represent what they represent. And I just want you to make sure that you know whether or not they represent you, and that you find the things that represent you. If we don't represent you, then you should not be a part. You should not be supporting what we're doing.
Right.
But and the same thing is true on the other side. Don't make people sort of trick you. Don't fall for the okie doke. Be intelligent. Right. You have to be intelligent. If you ain't woke, then you ain't black. Because they'll have you out here acting like a Klansman. Have you out here supporting white supremacists and you don't even know it. So you better be woke. All right, everybody. So please hit the thumbs up button, share button, subscribe button on your way out. And also, in case you didn't know, tomorrow the Black Business School has Black Experts Weekend, which is a free event. It's totally free to the public. You can join if you are a person seeking to make money from your skill, experience, or expertise, whether you want to be a social media influencer, you want to teach an online class, you want to be a consultant or coach, you want to be a public speaker, things like that. We've actually got about 15 different Black experts that we brought together. Thousands of people have registered, so you better get there early. We start at 9 a.m. We will be over capacity, but if you want to join us, feel free to come in. With blackexpertsweekend.com is the URL. Go check it out. All right, so have a good night, everybody. Hit the thumbs up button, share, subscribe on your way out, and thank you again to the panelists, and we'll see you guys soon. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
Here we are, clan the isms, cataclysm, great. Our people out here struggling, trying to make it in this state. Everybody out here doing it, but we the ones too late. Now family, we the ones who gotta delegate. Get that money in the power, never be fake. Stick to co-sign for 3. What did he say? Create jobs, support our own. Educate the same and buy back your home. Got 3 degrees, triple 10. 3 PhDs, now we on the CNN. DBTV, let's talk about negligence. Ignorance is bliss, but we can turn it to intelligence. Believe none of what you hear, half of what you see. Let's break it down here on Dr. Boyce TV. Here we are.